At 6:22 a.m. on May 4th, 2026, a Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot slammed his fighter into the most savage, low-level strike mission of the entire war. He was hugging the frozen ground at terrifying speed to smash a key bridge that Russian forces relied on to pour supplies and reinforcements into their grinding offensive around Pokrovsk. The sky above and around him had become the densest drone battlefield humanity has ever created, yet he refused to turn back. Russian invaders had turned cheap drones into invisible killers, and now Ukrainian pilots were forced to fly straight through their murderous web to hit back where it hurt most. Picture yourself strapped into that cockpit with the horizon blurring at 920 kilometers per hour. What would you do when every second could be your last? Tell us right now in the comments, because this flight rewrote the rules of air combat forever. Is the era of the multi-million-dollar fighter jet over, or can human courage still outsmart a swarm of $1,000 drones? What's your take, skill, or numbers? The MiG-29 roared eastward barely 80 meters above the snow-covered fields. Intelligence had promised a narrow corridor free of major threats, but that promise died the moment he crossed into it. At 310 meters higher, Ukrainian and Russian reconnaissance drones scanned every movement, while below 60 meters, FPV attack drones from both sides hunted anything that moved in a non-stop mechanical slaughter. The pilot clung to the fragile gap he had been given, only to hear his radar warning receiver explode with alarms. Something had locked onto him from nowhere. He yanked the stick hard, threw the throttle wide open, and punched out a stream of flares. The nose climbed as brutal G-forces crushed him into the seat. He traded the safety of terrain for raw speed, and the missile lost lock in the burning cloud behind him. New threats lit up immediately. The Kremlin's elite air defense net had found him. A Buk battery operated by Putin's top-tier operators to the south and an S-300 site farther east had painted him. These weren't just machines, they were Moscow's Iron Gate defenders, specifically tasked with making the Pokrovsk sky a no-fly zone for Ukraine. The pilot felt his stomach drop. An R-60 suddenly streaked toward the MiG without warning. He rolled violently and dove toward the deck, firing more flares, while the old missile seeker struggled to stay with him. A second Garen fired moments later. The afterburner howled, flares streamed like a comet tail, and he forced the MiG so low that fence posts flashed past in a deadly blur. The second missile exploded harmlessly among the decoys. Both drones continued relaying his position to far worse threats waiting ahead. The corridor was gone. Ground control came back in broken fragments, telling him the route was compromised, and they were hunting for another path through airspace no one had cleared. The target bridge still lay 23 kilometers ahead, but the safe passage had vanished. He dropped lower again, and the world turned into a living minefield. FPV drones sliced across his path from every direction. Some chasing Russian machines, others racing toward Ukrainian lines. He could not tell friend from foe until they were already flashing past at 260 meters per second. At that speed, an FPV appearing 600 meters ahead gave him barely 2 seconds to react. The boundary between sci-fi horror and frontline reality has officially been erased. The only real sensors left were his own eyes, and they were losing the race against machines that moved faster than thought. Power lines and towers were the least of his worries. Hair-thin cables strung across the ruins could be sucked into an intake and end the flight in an instant. Friendly interceptor drones joined the chaos, adding even more unpredictable metal to the sky. Every choice led to death. Stay low, and the FPV swarms would tear him apart. Climb, and the Buk or S-300 would rip him from the sky in seconds. He rammed the throttle past the stop and hauled the stick back. The engine thundered as raw fuel dumped into the exhaust, and the MiG surged upward, breaking out of the drone swarm. At 2,100 meters, the Buk radar locked on instantly. The pilot kept climbing to 3,100 meters, calculating on his iPad whether he could release his bombs and dive below the radar horizon before the missile arrived. Russian jamming from the R-330 Zytel system was already choking GPS signals across the entire area, turning precision weapons into uncertain guesses. He reached the apex and thumbed the release. 2 AASM Hammer bombs dropped cleanly, their rocket motors igniting for 14 seconds and driving them toward the pre-computed impact point on the bridge. He rolled inverted and pulled into a split S-dive, trading every meter of altitude for speed. The RWR screamed as a 9M3, 17M missile left the Buk launcher and accelerated to Mach 4.1 in 4 seconds. It rode the reflected radar energy from the ground station like a cat chasing a laser dot straight at the brightest point in the sky. The hammer bomb hit with 0 GPS signal. Are we witnessing the end of electronic warfare as a defense? Let's debate the future of smart weapons below. The altimeter raced downward past 2,200 meters. The airframe shook at the edge of control. There were no gentle corrections, only one continuous dive that had to be held until the last possible moment. At 700 meters, he began the pull-up. G-forces slammed his vision into a gray tunnel, but he kept hauling because pulling out even 1 second too early would let the radar still see him, and the missile would keep coming. The MiG leveled at 50 meters. The illumination beam vanished, the missile lost its guidance, and its proximity fuse triggered on empty air. It detonated harmlessly behind him. He was alive but completely disoriented. The wild maneuvering had thrown him far off his planned route into uncontrolled airspace, with the only way home running straight back through the drone hell he had just escaped. Fuel was dropping into the amber warning. His hands shook on the stick, yet he turned west and held 40 meters altitude, hugging every fold in the ground. FPV drones still flashed past, but their density began to thin as he neared friendly lines. At 6:37 a.m., the radio cleared and the controller voice came through steady. 16 kilometers behind him, the 2 AASM Hammer bombs completed their run. Even with GPS dead under a wall of Russian jamming, the Hammer switched to inertial guidance instantly. It instantly switched to its internal combat logic, calculating the kill path in milliseconds based on pure physics. The Russian Zytel electronic shield was useless. The Hammer didn't need a signal to find its prey. It knew exactly where the bridge's heart was, and it was coming for it with cold mathematical certainty. That single strike severed a primary Russian supply artery, feeding their offensive operations around Pokrovsk. Logistics convoys ground to a halt. Russian commanders were forced to reroute everything in the middle of active fighting, buying Ukrainian forces critical time and breathing room. The pilot brought his battered MiG home on fumes, his body still vibrating from the G-forces and the constant near misses. He had flown through the thickest drone matrix ever recorded, dodged modified German air-to-air ambushes, survived a Buk missile chase, and delivered precision destruction despite heavy electronic warfare. Russian forces had tried to turn the sky itself into an impassable barrier with swarms of cheap machines and relentless jamming. Ukrainian pilots answered by pressing the attack anyway, proving that courage, skill, and the right weapons can still break through even the most saturated battlefield on Earth. If you were the Russian commander and your main supply bridge just vanished, would you retreat or double down? Tell us your tactical move in the comments. The mission lasted barely 15 minutes, yet it changed how every Air Force now thinks about low-level strikes in drone-saturated wars. Russian invaders keep pouring resources into turning drones into hunters and jammers into blinders. Ukrainian forces keep finding ways to hit back harder and deeper. This pilot proved that even when the corridor disappears, and every sensor fails, the human being in the cockpit can still choose to fight through it all. Have you ever watched a mission like this and wondered how anyone survives it? Tell us in the comments what you think about these drone tactics and whether they have truly changed air warfare forever. We read every single one. The MiG touched down safely. Ground crews swarmed the jet, checking for damage from the impossible flight. Far behind him, smoke still rose from the shattered bridge, as Russian logistics teams struggled to find new routes across the frozen landscape. The strike had done exactly what it was meant to do. The bridge was the target, but the 3 Russian battalions were the prize. By shattering that single point of transit, one pilot achieved what an entire brigade could not: severely disrupted Russian frontline operations. This wasn't just a mission, it was the day the hammer fell and crushed the invaders' hopes for Pokrovsk. The mission of May 4, 2026 transcends a mere tactical success. It marks a paradigm shift in modern air power. Military academies will dissect this operation for decades, as the moment the human element stared into the cold, digital abyss of the drone age and refused to flinch. Over the blood-soaked skies of Pokrovsk, we witnessed the ultimate collision of 20th century kinetic force and 21st century electronic dominance. It stands as a definitive testament. No matter the density of the drone swarm or the intensity of the electromagnetic fog, a determined pilot with a mission-critical objective remains the most lethal and unpredictable variable on any battlefield. Russian high command banked on an impenetrable bastion. They poured billions into the Zytel electronic warfare suites, and the multi-layered iron gate of Buk and S-300 batteries, convinced they had rendered the sky an automated fortress. They were wrong. They fundamentally underestimated that war is not merely a calculation of frequencies and airframes, it is a contest of absolute will. By delivering French-made AASM Hammer munitions with surgical precision while navigating a gauntlet of FPV interceptors and Garand aerial traps, this MiG-29 pilot didn't just shatter a bridge, he dismantled the Kremlin's tactical doctrine. The collapse of that eastern span was more than structural failure. It was the total bankruptcy of a failed strategy, leaving 3 elite Russian battalions to pay the price for their command's arrogance. As the echoes of the RD-33 engines fade, a chilling reality remains. Is this the template for the future of conflict? Have we entered an era where every sortie is a high-stakes gamble against an autonomous enemy? The battlefield is evolving at a breakneck pace, and the lessons carved into the frozen earth of Ukraine are being scrutinized by every global superpower. The boundary between sci-fi horror and frontline reality has officially been erased.